Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer, and I hope you're all doing very well tonight. So, it is January. It is not just a new month, but a new year. But new month is the operative phrase here, because if it's a new month, we are going to do a deck tech update. If there's any changes we want to make. Now, there are some changes that we're going to make to the deck that's been serving us very well, but not that many changes. They're going to be very few and very far between. So I am actually going to use this video as part deck tech, part very, very brief channel update, and part Q&A, or AMA, whatever you want to call it. The first of potentially more to come of question and answer sessions that I'll have on this channel. So just to give you a brief rundown of what the structure of the video is going to be, there you have it. And the second order of business before we jump straight into the deck tech, attention patrons, the January scouting report against Bant Spirits has been published. The scouting reports are Patreon exclusive content for my financial supporters. It's where we go really deep into the investigation of an archetype. There's a bit of statistical analysis of recent decks that goes on. There's, of course, sideboarding guides, and there's kind of mindset or play pattern oriented advice and do's and do nots. So it's kind of an essay form / bullet point form, vacillating between the two. We kind of do it all. So that's something that's available to all of my patrons at any tier of support. So to all patrons, thank you so much for being awesome. And yeah, the Bant Spirit Scouting Report is ready for your perusal. So go check that out. And yeah, that's, I believe, all we needed to open up with. So let's hop right into the deck tech. So this build has served us very well in the month of December. The 3 leagues that I've played with it for this channel, all of which have, the 3 most recent leagues anyway, have been uploaded in full, 1 match at a time, have gone 4-1, 5-0, and 4-1. That's 13-2 in my 3 most recent leagues. That is quite spectacular in terms of results. I've also played 2 leagues prior to that with this list, or one very, very similar, a Dark Confidant list anyway. I went 4-1 and 2-3 in those. So yeah, the results overall since I've switched to Dark Confidant, and this build in particular, have been spectacular. So I am a big believer in very carefully testing the list, not making too many radical changes, and then once you find something that works, not changing just for the sake of change. Like, if you're bored, you want to play something different for fun, obviously that's great, but understand that it's kind of a for fun thing. I don't believe in fixing what isn't broke, in other words. That said, we do have a couple changes that we are still interested in making here. So what you're looking at right now is the exact 75 that I've been running. And the first thing that I'm going to do is bring back Fulminator number 3, which I have played with in the past. Now, Fulminator is a card that I am increasingly growing to appreciate. In the past, specifically when Assassin's Trophy came out, I said, Fulminator Mage, I love you. I really love the new box topper UMAs as well, but that's not something I'm investing in on this channel. At least not quite yet. Maybe in the future, who knows, we'll bling out the cards a little bit, but for now I don't think so. So I love everything about Fulminator Mage, but man, would it be nice to just not have to feel like I need to play these cards to have an edge, or to achieve parity even in certain matchups. I had hopes that the combination of Field of Ruin and Assassin's Trophy would allow us to cut Fulminator altogether. I think the passage of time, the decks that are putting up good results, including my own, have shown that we still need Fulminator Mage. It is actually still our best card a lot of the time against Tron, against other big mana decks, and it is a very valuable role player against control. And it's even a card that I'm coming to really appreciate more than I ever did in the past against Burn. I'm just winning games on the back of Fulminator Mage, these bizarre, long, grindy games against Burn where I end up taking them off of their splash color, stranding a couple cards in hand, and that's the advantage that I need to close out the game. So for those reasons, I'm bringing back the third Fulminator Mage. Now, a big part of me wanted to cleanly sub out the choke for this Fulminator Mage. I'm not going to. I've decided against that. I like choke. If you have seen my recent videos, there was it was against Merfolk actually, where choke, not even the best card against Merfolk. It's definitely questionable whether you want it specifically on the draw. They play a lot of utility lands, they play Ether Vial, it's by no means an I win button, but it was an I win button for me in one of my league matches, so that is something that I took note of course. But, you know, Merfolk's not that much in the meta, and choke is still a little iffy against Merfolk, so that's not why I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it because it is increasingly clear to me that the blue-white control decks, or the Jeskai control decks, are a problem. They're a big, big problem for us, and Fulminator, as I just said, is a good role player there, but I guess we still kind of want the biggest hoser that we can get, which in this case happens to be choke. Now, choke is by no means a foolproof card against blue-white decks. They still play a lot of utility lands, a lot of non-island blue sources, or not, I shouldn't say a lot, but a reasonable amount. And then, of course, if a Teferi has been stuck, well, they can just untap the lands manually through the choke. That said, it is still a very, very powerful card. It can really win the game in a lot of windows. I'm going to persist with it as long as these Jeskai and blue-white matchups continue to be a thorn in my side. Now, they are winnable. It's not an unwinnable matchup. But I was actually having this discussion earlier on Facebook. Kevin Wang, who is another Golgari content creator, you should go check him out. You can find his links in his profile on the BG Rock Facebook group. He actually made an assertion that Jeskai Control is our literal hardest matchup in the format. Now, I don't quite agree with that. I think Titan Shift, at least, and as Flying Delver pointed out, Living End is also another one I would say is definitely harder than Jeskai. But Jeskai is really a pain to sit down from across the table from. And a lot of our big boogeyman matchups aren't that bad anymore post-trophy. I'm thinking specifically of Tron, but even the other big mana decks, they're at least a little bit more manageable. So the gap between our moderately bad matchups and our very bad matchups has, to some degree, closed, perhaps with the exception of Living End. And yeah, so while I don't quite agree with Kevin's assertion, I don't think he's that far off either. I think blue-white control decks, and maybe Jeskai in particular, they're a big bear, so big hurdle for us to cross. So I brought in the third Fulminator, which is going to help there. It's going to help even more against the big mana decks, which, as I said, have improved, but they're still bad, and Fulminator is still usually our best card. So having access to all three, plus retaining access to the choke, I just hope that this will improve my percentages against control enough to be worthwhile. So what do we take out? Well, even though I just said I wanted more cards against control, I also don't want to have too many cards to bring in against control. That's been a problem that I've had in the past, where I have more cards to bring in than I want to take out, and my cards still aren't good enough to win the game. So for that reason, I'm making a bit of a decision that makes me wince because I love this card, but Collective Brutality. Collective Brutality is what has to make way. So the reason for that is that, number one, it fits that bill that I just said, where it's kind of a like-for-like against control. I think Fulminator is better. The third Fulminator, I should say, is better than the third Brutality against control. Beyond that, Collective Brutality is a wonderful card, but it's one where I often hedge, and I don't bring in the third anyway. I can say, well, the two I have main deck is sufficient. If I only had them in the side, I would be happy to bring in these two, but I don't know if I need the third. I just don't know if I quite need the third. And yeah, obviously there are exceptions to that. Burn is a fantastic example. I am definitely going lighter against Burn by making this change. However, like I just explained, Fulminator Mage is a reasonable card against Burn. So that's what I'll be doing in the matchup. Instead of bringing in a Brutality, I get to bring in a third Fulminator. It is a downgrade, but it is at least a viable replacement on some level. It's a card that you do sort of want in the matchup, right? So that's the in the out in the sideboard. We're just swapping in a Fulminator and out a Collective Brutality. Now, here's the other change we're going to make. Our girl Lily, the Last Hope, she has never done us wrong, and she has been fantastic. Even in these matchups where I've had her on the bench, I've been finding my one-of main, luckily, when I really need to. She's been pulling her weight very well, games 2 and 3 coming off the bench. I just need to bring her back into the main. She's just that good, in my opinion. It's always nice if you need more room in your main deck to be able to play the 1-1 split. I think that's very viable, but I've had my taste of that, right? I've had my taste of that. I think that's fine. I think I want her back in the main as a 2-of. I really do. So what I'm going to do is actually sidle a collective on over to the side here, and that's a pretty clean way to keep the deck about as well-rounded as it was, because, of course, this is a nice card to main deck because it's got all the utility. It can be whatever you want it to be, even if whatever you want it to be, you know, its version of that is a bit mediocre, it can still do it, right? But our Lily, she's a very well-rounded card as well. And Collective Brutality, I just don't know if it's quite at its best in this exact moment in Modern. It's still a card I believe in. It's still a card I want access to 2-of. It's still very, very powerful in a lot of matchups, and it's still very flexible. But I think it has, to a slight degree at least, seen better days in terms of how well positioned in the format it is. So I'm pretty happy to experiment with just one main and just one in the side. Now, do note that this makes our burn percentages go down a little bit by only having one of these in the main, and then again a little bit by only having 2 post-side instead of 3. Just worth noting. Just worth noting. But I'm not that worried about the burn matchup. I think we're pretty well positioned anyway. So there are other things I considered here, guys. I really considered making several changes, but in the end, I kind of talked myself out of all of them. One change was shuffling this Spellbomb back over to the side because it hasn't, I haven't played that many graveyard decks since I started main decking a Spellbomb, but that's results-oriented thinking. I don't want to fall victim to that. I think the meta objectively still calls for one Spellbomb main, or at least still justifies, let's say, one Spellbomb main. So I'm sticking with that for that reason partially. The other reason is, like, I mentioned how I sometimes hedge with the Collective Brutality. Well, I sometimes hedge with a Nihil Spellbomb against certain decks where I'm like, yeah, exactly one Spellbomb would be kind of good here. Like, in the old days when I had 3 in the side and none in the main, I was like, yeah, I can bring in exactly one Spellbomb. Where they're not committing too heavily to the graveyard, but they do have some graveyard mechanics. Yeah, one Spellbomb seems fine. So being kind of pre-boarded for that is not a bad position to be in. Plus, if it is a dead card, you only have one of them, so it's not like I'm maining 2 or 3 in an attempt to next level the meta. I'm just maining one. It can cantrip. It's not that clunky if you only have one of them. It can grow the Tarmogoyf, even though you clear out the opposing graveyard by putting an artifact type into your own. So, as much as I kind of thought about cutting this away because it hasn't come up that much, I think it's still correct to main it. A couple other changes I thought about making were adding that 4th Dark Confidant. I've been loving the Bob. I took the Bob pill, and I'm all in. I'm all in on Dark Confidant. He hasn't really steered me wrong. We've had some really epic escapes at 1 life with Bob flipping us a land multiple times. It's been great. It's been amazing. Love you, Bobby. So therefore I was interested in at least considering the 4th, but for now, I'm just sticking with the 3/3. I started messing around with the deck, and if I wanted the 4th Dark Confidant and I wanted to cut a Brutality, I would probably have to move to a 4-2 split of Inquisition and Thoughtseize, and I didn't want to do that. I really, really like 3 Thoughtseizes in this deck, and then I was like, am I getting too grindy with 4 Dark Confidant and 3 Tracker? Do I have to try considering maybe a 4-2 split with a Tracker in the side? It just became too many changes relative to how well my deck has been performing. So I'm just going to stick with the 3 Dark Confidant for now. The meta's still aggressive. I still think this is justifiable, but I've got my eye on that 4th Dark Confidant. He's waiting in the wings, ready to jump in when he's called. The other thing I thought about changing, speaking of Dark Confidant, is changing this Languish out for a Damnation. I am less excited about Languish now that I am playing Dark Confidants instead of Tazigurs. It just has less synergy with Confidant. However, Languish has come up big a couple times recently where I've had like 2 Tarmogoyfs on the field. I get a 4-for-1 on the Languish, and my Goyfs keep chugging along. It's just like... It's just really too good with Tarmogoyf. The big appeal of Damnation, though, is when the meta starts including more creatures that Languish cannot kill. I'm thinking of more Reality Smashers and more Gurmag Anglers, and I don't think the meta's quite there yet, but with the rise of Death Shadow, that's actually a vote in favor of Damnation, right? So... this is a slot I have my eye on. Of course, I would love access to both. Who wouldn't? A lot of people play both. I just don't have the room for it. I don't feel I can afford 2 sweeper effects in this sideboard, and I'm not interested in losing anything else just yet. So for now, the Languish stays, but I did consider swapping out the Languish for a Damnation, and I did consider reworking the deck to include the 4th Dark Confidant, but I don't think all of the cascading changes that would follow from that were warranted. So, to summarize, we had a couple very simple changes. We cut a Collective Brutality from the sideboard, and we added a Fulminator Mage in its place. And then we swapped another Brutality from the main to the side, and we brought our girl, Lily the Last Hope, copy number 2, back into the main. So let me know what you think about those changes. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I, of course, would love, maybe to get a 4th Assassin's Trophy back in here. A lot of top placing lists. Play the full 4 trophy, but I'm really liking access to Decay and Pulse in the main deck, and I don't know that we're supposed to cut anything else for yet another, CMC 2+ removal spell. When we could be disrupting the hand potentially, or the graveyard, or sticking threats, So, tough call, but for now, I like the 1-1-3 configuration of all this stuff. I like the land base as well. These utility lands are seemingly in good proportions to me. I don't have any complaints. So, that's what the update is, guys. Let me know what you think, as always. So, moving on to the second part of the video, just a very brief channel update. As it pertains to my Patreon account, I have established a goal of $100 per month. Ambitious? Yes, perhaps, but hey, I think I can get there. My channel, it has a lot of reach, it has consistent views, it has a lot of wonderful feedback, and I am offering some incentives to become a patron. Some of you have seen these before. Just very briefly, I'll go through them and then I'll mention the change. As an Inquisitor, at the $1 tier, you get access to the scouting reports. I just published one earlier this afternoon. They come out once a month. I already explained what those are about. As a Confidant, at the $5 tier, you get to vote. You get to vote on the scouting reports and what archetype you want to see next. If the votes are neutral, or if people are kind of up for whatever, then I'm going to do whatever the most popular deck of the moment is. I did Humans my first month, I did Spirits this month. But as a Confidant, you get to have a say in what I write about in great detail. As a member of the tier list here, you get to participate in the Q&As or AMAs, and you're about to see what those look like coming up shortly here. Finally, we have the Of the Veil tier, and that is the change that's been made. This is the tier where you get one-on-one coaching from me in whatever form works best for you. We can do it via long-form emails. We can hop on Facebook Messenger. We can even maybe set up some voice chats if that works for you. But this is basically unlimited, of course, within reason around my family and my work and all that stuff. Unlimited one-on-one coaching, whether you need somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody just to say, I'm not succeeding. What can I do to improve my results? Whether you need somebody to just kind of commiserate with, if you've talked your friends' ears off of them about the Golgari deck and they don't really have any insight to give you because they don't know what the deck does. That's what I'm here for. So I realize that the Of the Veil tier, it would be a very generous subscription. It's a lot of money per month, but I have lowered it from 25 to 20. And if anybody is interested in availing themselves of that coaching service, that's how you do it. So I just wanted to briefly mention that change has been made. And I am still exploring the idea of sending out cards through the mail to people, whether they be signed or anything like that. It's something that Nikachu MTG, who's very successful on Patreon, does. So I'm continuing to explore ideas for that. If anyone has any ideas about that, our other Patreon tiers, let me know in the comments below or wherever else you can get at me. So that's the very quick update. Now let's go to the AMA/Q&A. So like I just explained, this is usually going to be reserved for Patreons in the tireless tier. However, I wanted to show you what it's all about, and I do have one question from a patron who wanted to remain anonymous, which we'll do last. But first, I'm going to take a couple questions that I kind of wanted to field anyway from the general viewership at large. Just a couple questions I thought were worth answering in more of a long form than YouTube comments could allow for. So the first question, we had a commenter say, "Hey, I'm thinking about building the deck. I've watched some of Jeff Hoagland. He plays No Bob 4 Tracker. I'm wondering what you think about that," basically. And I was like, "Hey, man, that's a viable build. In fact, I've started off on this channel playing nothing but it. I've got a bunch of videos you can check out. I continue to think it's a viable build." Rose Rev, this is the question we're going to answer. What are the benefits and cons to each? Well, let's look back at our list to talk about this. So, we mentioned the control matchups, right? Specifically Jeskai control. Now, my patron, Dan, very insightful guy, very intelligent guy. If you see one of his comments on one of my videos, you should probably take the time to read it. It's often very, very enlightening. Dan makes some really good points about the Jeskai matchup, including a comment about how if he were trying to kind of tech against Jeskai, or if he knew that he was entering a Jeskai heavy meta, he would be interested in playing the Taziger build. And that is so true, because Taziger laughs at these red removal spells. He laughs at the burn spells, and he also can come down for cheap, and he's a card advantage engine, and he's a clock. So if you're against grindy red decks, Taziger is your man. That's a big con to playing the Taziger build. In fact, let's check out my Taziger build. I have not updated it since November, but it's still, it's still one we can use as a reference point. So, Taziger the Golden Fang. Look how well this guy lines up against Jeskai control. And then if we go back to the Dark Confidant build, you know how painful it is to get your Bob electrolyzed? They get to cleanly tag him, they get to draw a card, so they shut off our draw engine, but they get to cantrip themselves while doing it, and then they get to ping us for one insult to injury. It is just awful. Electrolyze on Tireless Tracker hurts a lot too, because, even if we got a clue off of her, let's say we play her turn 4, tracker into tap land, pass to you, they get to electrolyze her. That's just even. Like, one of our best cards, like a tracker on 4, turn 4 resolving followed up by a land, like, remember, this girl will not resolve a good amount of the time against Jeskai anyway. They can still trade with her at parity. We get a clue, but they get to just cantrip. So they actually come out ahead on tempo there, because we have to invest mana into drawing our card. So a lot of their spells just trade so well with some of our best advantage engines, and they have a better late game. Their big payoffs are stronger, and they have more consistency and inevitability. So this is one reason why the control matchups are tough, especially Jeskai. But as Dan pointed out, Taziger and the Taziger build in general lines up really well against Jeskai. We've got the 5 Planeswalkers main. We've got very painless progression. So if Jeskai is trying to kind of burn us out, well, they're going to have a tougher time doing it. They're going to have a tougher time removing our threats/advantage engines, and that's awesome for us. The other thing, I mentioned a painless progression. There's no Dark Confidant at all. So against burn, I mean, our Confidant build is good against burn. This is incredible against burn because there's no pain whatsoever outside of these 3 Thoughtseizes. And Taziger is great against burn, not only because he's not Dark Confidant, but also because he can come down and be played through Eidolons of the Great Revel. He will not trigger them, and suddenly, with a big old 4/5 on the board, their Eidolons might actually be hurting them more than they're hurting us, because they cannot attack into him. If we've done a little damage by then, we can turn him sideways. You know, Taziger can single-handedly kind of lock them under their own Eidolons sometimes. So the sheer painlessness of this progression that you're going to get from this Taziger build, plus how well Taziger lines up against a lot of decks, very good against mid-range as well as control. Yeah, those are kind of the big selling points to the build. You're also incentivized to play a full 25 lands, so you can get slightly greedy like I did and play a full 4 Field of Ruin. You can play 5 man lands without them really cramping your style, or you can find more utility in the land base elsewhere. And if you love the card Tireless Tracker, well, this is really meant to maximize where you play a full 4 and you play 25 lands. So you get to go ham on a regular basis with the tracker. It's a great deck, it really is. So those are the major pros to playing the Taziger build. The cons, well, the cons are it's more prone to flooding. It is often less proactive in the early game because we cannot quite manage it to resolve a Taziger on turn 2 in this deck. He's more of a turn 3 play, or turn 4 sometimes, which is a fine rate for the card, but you don't get to have the proactive play of turn 2, play my Dark Confidant, and go. And that is a very powerful thing to be able to do in Modern. Even though Modern's got a million answers to Bob, even though he can be a liability sometimes, that's all true. It's still one of the most powerful plays our deck can make on turn 2 against a lot of non-interactive decks. If you just play your Bob, untap with him, you are going to win. You are going to win because you have so much interaction. You can have double spell turns, you can get another threat down on the field, and you can start closing out the game while keeping pace with what they're doing. So, I guess in short, the pro to playing the Taziger build is that it doesn't have Dark Confidant, and the con to playing the Taziger build is that it doesn't have Dark Confidant. That's about the long and short of it. Now, there are other deck building considerations, of course. With the Taziger build, you're more incentivized to play high CMC things, because you don't have the Bob triggers to worry about, and because you have the higher land count to cast them on curve successfully. And with the Bob, you want to keep your curve a little bit lower. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel the Bob build is slightly but clearly stronger right now, and the results we're seeing in the meta in terms of what decks are 5-0 in competitive leagues would corroborate that. So that answers your question, I hope, Rose Rev, as to what are the benefits and cons to each. Now, the second question from the general public that I want to address is this from Tyler Evans, who, first of all, says greatness at any cost indeed, so you know he's thinking the right way, so definitely with you there, Tyler. Greatness at any cost. So we talked about how great Dark Confidant is, and then he said, tangent, but I'm wondering how come you like running BG as opposed to other variations of the deck, as well as picking this playstyle in general. What do you like about the colors of the deck, and what do you like about how it plays? So, Once again, this is something that I'll usually be fielding questions only from my patrons, but this was a great question, and it's one that I really wanted to address. So let's address it. We've got the first half of that question is, why this style of deck in general? Basically, why a fair interactive deck in general? Maybe more specifically, why a black-based mid-range deck in general? Well, to answer your question, Tyler, I have played everything in Modern. Not literally every deck, but I've played every archetype. I've played a few different combo decks. I've played a few tribal aggro decks. I've played some more... I've played Death and Taxes style decks, which kind of fall in their own category, I suppose. I've played blue-white control. I have played Abzan and Golgari mid-range as well. So I've kind of run the whole gamut. I've basically played everything except prison strategies, which I do not have any interest in. And at the end of the day, the decks that fulfilled me the most, the decks that it was most rewarding to win with, were the ones where my decisions mattered the most, and that led me to the necessity that I've got to play a fair interactive deck. Now, I figured that out like a year and a half ago. And I'm like, alright, I'm never not going to have a fair deck around, but I don't have a local gaming store. I have to drive an hour to reach the quote-unquote local. And it's a great place. There's a bunch of great guys there. Shout out to the Cave if anyone from there is watching. But with my work and family life, I cannot get up there very often anymore. So over time, I eventually began kind of selling off my decks and kind of whittling down my collection. I used to have like 4 Modern decks ready to roll at any given time, but since I can only play like once a month, once every 2 months in paper, it's just not worth doing anymore. So I was like, maybe I should just build the most expensive deck since I'm selling off some of my cheaper ones. And honestly, that, the realization that I had to whittle down to 1 or 2 decks, that opened up the financial window for me to say, hey, maybe I can finally consider buying Tarmogoyfs and Lilianas of the Veil. These cards don't come cheaply. And so I started proxying the deck. I started playing with a buddy on some free testing apps, and I really, really liked the BGX playstyle. I love the blend of early game and late game stuff. Like, blue-white control was fun too, but it was more of like, do a little bit of token interaction early game or do some setup, and then your late game is inevitable. Here it's like, you really can kind of run people over with an Inquisition into a Tarmogoyf, into more interaction, into Liliana, either Liliana, frankly. You can really run people over and kill them turn 5. I like that this deck has it in its locker to do that. I also like that it can grind with the best of them, so I love the interaction. I love the fact that it's kind of in that mid-range realm where sometimes you're the beatdown, sometimes you're the control. I love it. The skill testing aspect of casting discard spells and of sequencing. This is a high skill cap deck. I know a lot of people realize that. Some people don't. Some people are like, oh, how hard is it to cast a Thoughtseize and take their best card? Well, no offense, but if you're asking that question, you're probably taking the wrong card, at least some of the time with your Thoughtseize, because it is never... I shouldn't say never. It is rarely an obvious decision. You should be thinking down the tunnel of time several turns to make the best decision, and therefore it's almost by definition not easy. Couple that with the fact that Modern is increasingly linear and diverse. It's hard to necessarily be prepared for everything, both in terms of your 60, in terms of your sideboard, in terms of your knowledge and your ability. Like, it's not easy. So I relished the challenge because I was like, okay, this is not easy, but I also think that these BGX decks are underrated right now. This was however long ago, maybe a year ago, I started messing around with BGX. I did play Abzan for a while. And so that's the second part of Tyler's question is, why do you like running BG as opposed to other variations of the deck? And I've played a little bit of Jund, but I inherently do not really like red cards. So right out of the gates, I was like, I kind of want to play Abzan. And I played Abzan, and it was cool. And I did all right. I did pretty decently, to be honest. But the meta changed, and Lingering Souls became less and less appealing, and that made the Grim Flayer Souls package less appealing, because if Grim Flayer isn't milling value into your yard, if he's just kind of card selection, I don't think he's quite powerful enough for the format as it is. And then you had the open question of whether you even want to play Path to Exile at all, which is one of the reasons to be in white, but, you know, when Reed Duke plays Abzan, he doesn't play Path to Exile in a 75. So it's like, am I just making my mana base a lot clunkier and more painful and with less utility just to play Stony Silence? Like, I can beat these artifact decks without Stony Silence. And that led me to start playing the BG variants, the straight Golgari. And oh my god, do I not regret that decision. I love the clean power and utility of this land base. I love, in a way, being restricted to just 2 colors, because that allows for a higher density of some really powerful cards like Scavenging Ooze. None of the 3-color BGX decks are playing 3 Ooze in the main deck, but maybe they should be, because he's really, really good. And, you know, similar things apply across the board, really. So I truly believe that everything we need to succeed is contained within these 2 colors. Now, I respect the power of Jund. I think Jund is just about as viable. You know, obviously having Lightning Bolt is great, having Grim Lavamancer. You talk about the control matchup, Bloodbraid Elf makes that so much better. I acknowledge all of this. Kolaghan's Command's a heck of a card. But we have our strengths too. And I think they might just be enough to make our deck, our simple 2-color deck, the most well-positioned of all the BGX flavors. Now, I have always historically also favored 2-color decks. When I was exploring in my control days, I considered playing Jeskai, but I was like, no, I love blue-white. I love Field of Ruin. This is this is too clean to pass up for me. So I hate losing to Blood Moon. You know, I hate getting, I hate losing to my own mana base. All that stuff. I hate having really painful, you know, Fetch Shock sequences all the time against aggro decks. I just love straight Golgari. So I hope that answers your question, Tyler. Now, for our third and final question of the AMA, this was from a patron who wished to remain anonymous. And if you are a patron who wishes to ask me something to be answered in the video in the future, yeah, just let me know. If you want to be anonymous, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll give you a shout out. And this supporter said, how did you start off in Magic? What made you want to play? And when did you begin? And with what, basically? You know, like, with what friends, with what product? So I'll tell you. I began... I don't even exactly know. I think it's in 4th edition, but I did a little bit of looking for the starter deck product that I purchased, and I can't find it anywhere. I saw a couple YouTube videos of people opening 4th edition starter decks, but they're all mixed colors in there. I remember this vividly, a mono black starter deck was the first thing that I bought, which maybe that also further answers the question that I just addressed as to why I settled on this as my main deck in the format. Well, I started off on mono black, and here we are with like the classic black deck of the format. So anyway, it was a mono black deck. Yeah, all just commons basically, or all just starter cards, you know, like Drudge Skeletons, Paralyze. I think there was Vampire Bats in there. It was awesome. It was so cool. It really captured my imagination at a young age. And I was in elementary school. I was probably in 3rd grade. But like I said, I can't find the specific product, so I think what probably happened is I bet my local gaming store, which is where I got this starter deck, you know, just had a bunch of 4th edition cards, or, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 4th edition. Could have been something else, but I'm pretty sure it was 4th. Probably just had a bunch of 4th edition cards lying around and said, hey, we'll repack a bunch of these and make and sell our own little starter deck. So My parents brought me to the mall one day. My friends and I had been looking at Magic the Gathering for a while. I convinced them to buy me a starter deck. Again, mono black. I also convinced them to buy me one other thing, and I remember this vividly. I will always remember this because it is hilarious. In their display case, they had this card. Are you ready for this? It's Gerard of the Closed Fist. It is a 6-mana, 6/5 legend with no rules text whatsoever. Now, at the time, I remember this vividly. This was a $20 card. I had talked my parents into buying this card. They were fine buying me like a game with a starter deck and a rule book for whatever it was, $5-10. That seemed fine to them. But buying a single card for $20 seemed completely insane to them. And I was not a greedy child. I was not a child who asked for much. I was, I'm not trying to assume the mantle of false modesty here, but I was genuinely content with just having, a little, whatever I had was fine with me, basically. But I think they could tell how into this I was and how much this kind of inspired me. So I talked him into getting the $20 single. And of course, that was totally unplayable in my mono black deck. And it's a card that basically does nothing these days. Now, look how cool it is. I love that stylized old art, kind of the burnished feel of it. It was amazing. The name's cool. The flavor text is cool. Thoroughly badass, right? But also think of how many better singles I could have chosen from Legends to spend $20 on 20 years ago, or however long this was. My God, I could have ended up with some cards worth many hundreds right now, but instead, third grade me was like, nah, we need that Gerard of the Closed Fist. And of course, it's one of the few legends that just tanked in price. Pretty funny. That said, all of my cards from back then, we were little kids. They all got damaged or lost or both. So, no big deal, but still highly, highly amusing if you ask me. So from there, I taught my friends how to play. They went and got starter decks too, and it was all over from there. We started playing. We didn't really know the rules. We made up a bunch of stuff. As we got older, we got to know the rules better. But I just played kitchen table Magic with my friends only. On and off, on and off, on and off throughout my childhood and then my young adulthood. And then I got into, semi-competitive computer gaming for a little while. And then when my wife and I had our children, I took a step back from the hardcore computer gaming, but I've got to scratch the gaming itch, right? So I got back into Magic, and of course now I've gotten more competitive into Magic than I ever planned to, but this is way more suited to my lifestyle now, and it's also bringing me back to my roots. I truly believe this is the greatest game ever created, and it's the one that I loved from the onset as a very young child, and I still love to this day. So to my patron, thank you for your support. Thank you for your question. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into that. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do the January Deck Tech update. We've done that. I wanted to do the brief channel update with the updated patron tier. We did that. And I wanted to answer a few questions, and we've done that. So let's go ahead and leave it there. As always, everybody, I thank you so much for tuning in. One last announcement. I might be traveling out of town this weekend. I don't know yet, but if I am, it might be 4 or 5 days before I get to upload any more content for you. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. If I'm around this weekend, I'll definitely play some games. But, if I'm gone for a while, don't be alarmed. Anyway, as always, thanks for tuning in. Leave any suggestions in the comments below about the few changes to the deck or any other changes you'd like to make, about the patron stuff, about the Q&A stuff. I'd love to hear it all. So thanks for watching. Appreciate all of your views, all of your support, and stay tuned to the channel. I hope you have a great night, and I will talk to you soon.